afternoon our focus is going to be, I suppose, to draw on all the insights and the challenges and the questions that were raised this morning about commoning and commoning struggles and practices, and reflect on those in the context of, I suppose, commoning in Ireland. And we've invited Anne Ryan, who has done some work on the idea of enough is plenty, and we've invited Anne to reflect on her encounters with commoning and how she came to commoning in the first place, just to further, I suppose, stimulate our thinking for this afternoon on our own experience of commoning in Ireland and its relevance to where we're at now and to our imagination of the future and our struggles towards that.
Yeah, I know that actually many of you here in the room would have seen those two clips before, those two videos, but actually I really like to watch them, so I think it helped me to relax to see them, but also it is a kind of a focusing device for the afternoon, and I wanted to, I suppose part of what I'm going to do this afternoon is to kind of trace some of my own engagement with the Commons, how I became aware of the notion of the Commons. My lineage is not as deep or as long as George and Sylvia's, and I was deeply humbled by the depth of their knowledge this morning. My own kind of awareness of the notion of the Commons really came around that notion of cap and share and the atmosphere as a global commons. So I thought that really, if I was trying to explain cap and share, I might as well show the 5-minute video and not try and do it myself. And so I'm going to sort of trace a little bit of my own connection with the commons, and then I'm going to move into looking at how I feel that radical notion, the practice and philosophy of enough, underpins the whole notion of the commons. And I suppose a bit like the notion of the commons, it's one of those key words that Raymond Williams uses. It can mean anything. It's like sustainability and all those other words that have multiple meanings. But when I'm coming at the notion of enough, I'm coming from a sort of a green stroke feminist transformative point of view, with the heart beating on the left, really. So it's that kind of amalgamation position that I'm coming from. And so I'll talk about how enough I see it as a radical and supportive notion of the transformative commons. And then I'll move into a very practical experience I've had with a community supported farm in County Kildare where I live. And I'll be making some connections there with some of the things that emerged from the discussion this morning. And I'll talk a little bit about just some of the things I've observed in relation to work and the kind of personalities and subjectivities and the human person that has emerged there. And we'll come back towards the end again then to, we're very lucky to have today with us Caroline White, who's sitting down there. And Caroline has been closely involved with the Cap and Share work over the years and is now involved in trying to set up a global trust to put Cap and Share into place globally. And that actually comes back to the notion of scale that came up this morning as well. So I'll invite Caroline to say a few words about that, to give her a few minutes to say something about that. And then we'll move into, I'm terribly aware that what I'm offering today is only partial. It's really partial. I'm thinking of us all here together in the room as a big patchwork quilt. And I'm just a few little patches on it. And I'm going to offer them as kind of stimuli to you all. And the rest of you then are going to engage in creating the rest of the patchwork quilt this afternoon. And we came up, I came up with this, or I came across this notion of an old Irish word called Quimcne, C-O-I-M-C-N-E. And it's in Old Irish. You don't find it in the Modern Irish Dictionary. But it means shared knowledge, mutually created wisdom. And I was struck by the idea, by the root of it. C-O-I-M is the same as the word quimine, which is the Irish word for common. So I think they might have something in common. And maybe there are some Irish language experts in the room. So we'll engage in that then after I finish speaking. So yeah, as I said, that whole notion of cap and share is where I came into the commons, and that was probably about, I think my personal knowledge of it came around with an earlier version called Contraction and Convergence, and that was around 2004. And while many people come to the notion of the commons from a very local scale, I actually came to it at that very broad level. And around the same time, I was toying with this whole idea of enough. I was really beginning to look into it as a way of supporting my own personal commitment to kind of living a good life, and also then enough as a basis for public life and for kind of healing the world, if you like, and transforming things to a more egalitarian and ecologically sound way of living. And I suppose when we think about the word enough, there is often in modern English and in modernity in general, we really associate it with mediocrity. You know, when we talk about enough, we think, oh, right, it's good enough, it'll do, it's not, but it's not about excellence and all those things that we're supposed to be pursuing these days. And I suppose that minds kind of steeped in market culture, maybe that neoliberal personality that George talked about this morning, doesn't really always get the concept of enough. But if you think about, again, back to the Irish language and many other languages, the phrase go leor means plenty, and it also means enough. So we can make the connection between enough and abundance, or as Juliet Shaw calls it, plenitude, and so on. And I think too, while the neoliberal mind doesn't always get the notion of enough, except maybe in a kind of fashionable minimalism, you know, the left in Ireland doesn't get the concept of enough either. And that whole notion of enough is plenty doesn't seem to resonate with the left in this country. And I'm hoping there may be experiences from other countries in the room that will help me to understand that a bit differently. Because I made connections for myself with the notion of enough as plenty, and Ivan Illich's notion of convivial austerity, a sort of, somebody used the phrase this morning, a mutually agreed forbearance. I think that, did you say that, Mary? Yeah. Was that from Illich? Yeah. A sort of an agreement on what limits might exist for us, but in a very convivial way. And so maybe the word austerity needs to be reclaimed somehow or other, back from that notion of punitive austerity, which we are rightly fighting against, into a notion of conviviality and a freely chosen frugality that could even be kind of sexy in its appeal as well. And so there's something about the whole concept of enough that and galore and enough as plenty and plenitude that I think is an underpinning concept that's really useful for radical commoners, and really useful as we try to tell ourselves new stories about the ways that we can construct the world. And it very much underpins the whole notion of cap and share as well. The cap being the sufficiency or the kind of quantitative measure, scientifically agreed, of what is enough, and then the sharing out, ensuring that there's enough for everybody. So I just want to move through, I just need to keep an eye on the time, just to move through some aspects of enough that I've identified that I think are just useful for us to meditate on a little bit. I've chosen 4: enough and its connections with ecology, enough and its connections with morality, with an aesthetic or an idea of beauty, and enough and spirituality. And some of those things have kind of come up already earlier in the morning's discussions as well. So if we think about enough and ecology, I suppose I would say almost everybody here is aware of the connection between the word the eco in ecology and the eco in economics, meaning, coming from the Greek word oikos, meaning home. And if we think about ecology as the study of the home planet, the home that sustains us and gives us life, and the ecosystems and nature that actually connect, support us, then enough then is thinking about how everything flourishes in relation to each other. So how we can share things out in a sufficiency so that everybody has sufficient to flourish. And ecology then takes us into the notion of nature, which actually in healthy ecological systems and in healthy natural systems, they do spontaneously observe limits. So if something in nature grows too big, it's like a cancer, or if a tree goes too big, it will topple over. But humans actually have to choose those, so it has to be a sort of politically informed choice for humans to choose limits in order to be sort of ecologically harmonizing with ecology and with natural systems. And I suppose I'll come back later to this, the idea of subjectivity, or the sense of oneself as a person, or the personality, as George called it this morning. But I do kind of take a view of the human person that sees us as most at home in sort of ecologically sound regimes, or in systems of enough, that we feel at home. And that comes back again to the word oikos. And also, Ursula Le Guin, the science fiction writer, has a beautiful phrase about the wider household of being. So that it's not just our home place in the sense of the little local place where we live, but that we have a sense of the planet as our home, and that wider household of being. And that sort of leads me in to thinking about the connections between enough and morality, because if we're to think about that wider household of being, then enough kind of encourages us to think of how I am and in relation to all the other living beings on the planet. So again, it's about connections. And it does also seem to me that morality really comes from feelings. So the modernist minimalist self, that self of neoliberalism, is often encouraged to be very compartmentalized, as we talked about this morning, people doing things in really compartmentalized ways in their lives, which kind of cuts us off from feeling, and then we're not encouraged to ask really difficult questions about what do the things that I do, how do they have an effect on other people in the world. And actually in one of, I think the article that we got to read from Sylvia, there's a sentence about, how my actions affect others. They may actually produce death and destruction for other people. And we're really, in modernity, not encouraged at all to think about that. But I think if we bring in a philosophy of enough, we're kind of on the road to doing that. Because if we're thinking of enough as a right of membership of society for everybody, that will automatically come through. And I suppose in Ireland, we are here in an Irish context. There, and as Mary very eloquently remarked this morning, we've had a huge sea change in what we consider, in what's normal in Ireland. But we have objected in many ways to the language of morality because of the influence that Catholicism has had on it. We have, I think, in many ways begun to associate morality with moralizing and with a commentary on our personal morals. But actually we really need to have a much broader concept of morality, and then the ethics, the ethical actions or behaviours that follow through from that, and to really think about the whole notion of choice, which neoliberalism has encouraged us to see as just more and more an endless choices, but to think about choice, if we're thinking about it through the lens of enough, it recasts choice as moral decisions. So how will what I do affect somebody else? And the moral decision, how will my decisions affect the common good or not? And so enough then, I think, can be, if we look at it through that lens of morality, enough is actually a kind of a civic value that can underpin a kind of much needed serious discussions in public life, which we're having here today, but which we need a whole lot more of. And I also think that there is a certain beauty in the whole notion of enough. And I know that there's a movement called If Beauty Could Save the World, and that would be really lovely, because I think when we talk about the commons and when things are right, they're beautiful, you know. And I know there's 3 art students down the back of the room, so I'm very conscious of being a very uninformed person talking about aesthetics and about beauty. But I think if we're talking about enough, we are talking about kind of a delicate balancing act a lot of the time, sort of walking the edge between what's misery or too little, and then what's excess or too much, you know. What is just right. In a way, it's kind of like baby bear's porridge, not too cold and not too hot, but just right. And that can actually be fun as well. You know, there's a beauty and a wholeness in striving for that. So, and I think when commons projects work well, there is something really beautiful about them in the way that people recognise parts of themselves. And we all have that capacity for sufficiency. I think everyone is born with it, but modernity has kind of, has sort of accultured it out of us. So we need to put ourselves back in touch with that. And actually, if you think about it, in the arts really do recognise the notion of limits, because like in music, the gaps and the silences between the notes are as important as the notes themselves. And if a piece goes on for too long, it's unwieldy. It's not attractive. If a painting exceeds the frame that it's in, it's not quite right either. So the whole notion of limits does come into an aesthetic around enough. And then on spirituality, enough on spirituality, I think, again, it's probably a little bit like morality, that we need a deeply grounded secular morality. We need the same, I think, in terms of spirituality. And I think enough, well, for me anyway, there's something about spirituality that is about a really full attention in the present moment to what is actually happening, even if that's kind of painful. So that's grounded very much for me in the whole notion of the body, what's happening to the body, what's happening to nature, and what is happening to place. And so I suppose mindfulness is one of the more, maybe more acceptable terms, but actually I think it's important to talk about it as a secular spirituality. And very often conceptions of spirituality these days are portrayed as trying to find peace of mind, which I think is very good, but very often that's also then sold to us as accepting what's going on around us. But I think that's what we really need is a spirituality of resistance, because it's just, and trying to create something better, and that's to me where that peace of mind, that spirituality comes from. And of course that resistance theme came up this morning, the commons of resistance. But we can't resist things that we're not aware of, so we have to have that full attention. And I think all of those kind of things that I've mentioned, spirituality, morality, ecology, aesthetics, they recognise deeper levels of ourselves than we're encouraged to see really in the modern world. And the modern self is really very often cut off from those levels. And I think it's really worth reviving it. So that's all very well, and it's all very nice to talk about. And I was thinking about the commons and commoning and enough for several years, and I was working in a very busy academic job, and I was doing a few other things, and I was thinking, what I really need to be doing is trying to put some wheels on these ideas, you know, actually putting stuff into practice. So I was lucky enough to get a sabbatical from my job in 2012, and I thought one of the things I really want to do in the area where I live is to get together with a group of people to start a community supported farm, because at this stage the penny had dropped for me, and I realised that also community supported farming was a form of commoning. So from cap and share to community supported farming, I had made some connections. And very briefly say, community supported farming, most of you will know, is where a community agrees to pay a certain amount of money up front on an annual basis or a monthly basis or whatever, which provides a wage for a farmer who grows food. So then the members get their box or their bag of food each week in return. And there are different models. There could be an existing farm where a farmer is already farming and he or she decides to go out and find this community who support the farm in that way. Or it can be a start-up thing where a small community forms and says, our community will look for some land, we'll find a farmer, and that's how we do it. And so that's what we did in Selbridge in County Kildare, where I live. But of course it wasn't that simple. I wanted to do it. I knew about community-supported farms. There weren't any other ones around me. So I had to go and find people that I could start it with. And my sister Joan and I were always talking about these things. And then next thing I had a bit of time, and we started going to a cafe in the town that was run by somebody who definitely had a kind of social enterprise vision for his cafe, and there were interesting people hanging out there. And eventually we met somebody in the cafe who was a farmer and who was growing on his own plot in a very small piece, about 1/4 of an acre, and selling some of the produce. And we started talking. And we eventually came around to the idea that we could, as a small group, this guy Nathan and his brother Greg, the two sisters and the two brothers, we spent hours talking. And well, we were old enough to be their mothers, so then we said, why don't we just do it? You know, so we got a few more people around us, and I'm kind of cutting a long story short, and we managed to get land to rent, which also was a struggle, because land is a huge issue, and although there's a lot of idle land around the town where we live, it was all zoned light industrial and was owned by people waiting to develop it, and nobody was doing anything with it. So back to Mary's notion of waste this morning, the land was lying idle. But yet it was really hard for us to get our hands on it. So it was very exciting to be starting up this project. The revolution is very exciting, but the revolution is also very boring, because we spent a lot of time making phone calls, sitting in county council offices. Eventually we had to get a county councillor to mediate for us with the county council, because the officials, the employees really, I don't know why, but we couldn't get through to them. So eventually we got our acre of land to rent, and there's actually someone else in the audience here today, Seamus there, who's sitting behind Mary, who has quite a bit of involvement with the farm and is on our farm advisory board as well. So I hope Seamus might have a few things to say later. But I suppose what I want to say about the farm is, while it is about food production, and we're now in our second year of harvests, and we have 35 households as members, it is much more than about just providing food for people in the locality. And I was really struck by Sylvia and George's comments on that this morning, that it's about equality of relations. And I can see that emerging very, very clearly in this nascent, very financially fragile farm. I can see it already. Now let me just describe very briefly, it's on the outskirts of a village called Selbridge, which has a population of about 20,000, close to Maynooth, which has about 30,000 population. It's just off the M4 motorway, so you can hear the hum of traffic at all hours of the day and night. It's not some idyllic, place in a rural valley. It's very suburban. It's a beautiful field of about 10 acres where we are allowed to rent only 1 acre. We have a wrecked caravan on site, which is kind of our site office. We have furniture made out of pallets. We have a brazier where we sometimes light a fire. And we have 35 households as members, so that's about 70 people involved. Some are single person households, and then others are 3 or 4 people households. And I'd say out of the 70, there are about 20 people who are really active in the farm. A lot of people just pay their money and come and take their vegetables, and they're very happy to do that. But there are about 20 people who have really taken on this notion. Now, they don't use the term commons or commoning. So, like the man from Waterford this morning who was saying, how do we, what's the point in using this language? We actually don't really use it. The very small organising group do. We know it's a commons, but more often than not we talk about it as a club, just a membership farm, which is like a type of a club. But what I see there is people have said to me, this is a space where I can come to make friends and to socialise and to hang out with other people, and it doesn't cost me any money. I can come here at any time and I can meet people, or if I can help Nathan the farmer if there's jobs to be done. And we do sometimes have actual work days where people come along and help as in a kind of a mehel. So it's creating a public space. In our town there is a complete absence of free municipal spaces for people to meet, and we don't have that lovely. We actually had a lovely guy selling coffee from a van on the street at a kind of wide part of the street, and he was driven away by the county council. But what was happening around his van was that people were congregating and talking and chatting, and that was kind of wiped out. So the farm is actually providing a space. It's a home. It is an oikos for us, and we're able to invite more people there. So we have now recently one of our members has started doing lunches, a community meal using produce from the farm. And we just had one, Seamus was there, and it was a really lovely occasion because we could invite friends to come to it and do something over food. So it's really about the quality of relations. And it's a place where people are able to come. The more active members are able to come there, and they're kind of able to do something about fulfilling their potential, And what I'm noticing is that the people who are most active in the farm, apart from, well, obviously the farmer is being paid a very modest wage, but the others are people who are freelancers or more precarious workers, who are able to, so they're able to do some of their paid work, and then they come and do unpaid or voluntary work on the farm. They come and hang out there. There is a creation of hope around the farm. There's a real sense of that, and a kind of education. It's a sort of political space where people are able to talk about how things might be different. And I think one of the things we lost in Ireland during the Celtic Tiger was the notion of that different routes into the future were possible. When we thought of change, we thought it would be more growth, only maybe speeded up, but now I think with the crisis that we've had, these kind of spaces are opening up, and the farm is, so it is a social space, but there is also a very real sense of place in it. So although we're backing onto the M4 motorway and you can hear the traffic, you can still walk down the field, and there are wild cherries growing, and there are sloe bushes, and there are blackberries, so people can come and forage there. There's a little kind of nascent oak wood. There's a kind of mother oak at one end with little oak trees around it. And actually we gave the name Derrybeg to the farm, meaning a little oak wood, because of that oak tree. And there's a real sense of place. So I think that there is that sense of home, of welcoming. We have talked sometimes about who owns the farm, and I think the notion of ownership is an interesting one in the Commons. Even on Cap and Share, at the end, they said the Commons, the atmosphere belongs to us all. We all own it. So I suppose, insofar as you can say anyone owns it, well, then we all own it. But the notion of ownership is a complicated one, and when I'm talking about the farm, I always say nobody owns it. It is a resource, and I know the word resource is controversial, but it's a resource that is managed on behalf of all the members of the farm, but nobody actually owns it. I'm prepared to go, as I said, as far as saying it's like a club, because I think Irish people understand the notion of club. We have experience in that. But what I also notice is that the farm owns me, and the farm owns those other active members. We belong to the farm, so we have a sense of actually belonging there. So that whole notion of ownership and belonging is all tied up there, and even the work that we do there, I think it has the harvesting and the weeding and the helping the farmer and the coming together around food, there is a sense that the work we're doing there is healing the mind-body split. Even if, and I have to say as well that the farmer, Nathan the farmer, helped by Seamus, it's real knowledge economy. You know, it's really skilled work, calculating how, you know, the planting plan and the harvesting plan and how to have enough for everybody each week. It is astounding. And there are, we have of course cooperation with Seamus's farm. We've bought a tractor in common, and we're cooperating with other farmers, with other community supported farms in the area and in the country as well. So I'll leave Seamus to say more about that. But it does, it really, I can see emerging in that very new, very fragile space already, the things that we were talking about this morning, that other type of personality that is different from the neoliberal personality, different from that kind of minimalist, Spartan self that has to sort of put a lid on feelings a lot of the time. And that's to me is about resilience. That's creating resilience, because the social connections, the thickening of the social connections that are existing in that farm, in that commons, really mean that people have a dense network around them, so that if they have a little bit of a crisis of some kind, there's help available, or they know where to ask for help. They know that other people will be around them just to be with them if they have some kind of a crisis. So I think that the commoning self, or the self of enough, is definitely a relational self, as opposed to that very discrete self of neoliberalism. And then there is also the notion related to that idea of what kind of selves and what kind of personalities we have about participation. I think if we were saying this morning, actually Mary and I were talking about this over breakfast, that there's no magic bullet for healing the world in the way that we need to heal it. There's, commoning isn't a magic bullet. Nothing is a magic bullet. But perhaps then, we said, maybe participation, maybe learning to participate together and to relate is, if there's any magic bullet, maybe that is it. I hope I haven't misrepresented what we said, Mary. But I think we have to learn to deliberate together, and we have to learn to have a consensus, to reach consensus insofar as possible, or reach decisions through deliberation. But the big thing about that is that it takes time. And it appears to me that capitalism just wants to steal every piece of our time that it can. You know, it wants to capture and enclose our time, if we want to use that kind of language. And time is one of our biggest assets if we are to do these other projects. And I suppose Sylvia talked about this morning about people commoning in situations of absolute necessity. So they definitely have time on their hands. But in the world that we're living here in Ireland, I think time is something that a lot of people feel really pressed for. And so their participation in projects like this is limited to just maybe paying their membership fee. Like, I know that a lot of the members of our farm are very pressed for time, or they're holding down jobs that are tricky or whatever. So they don't have the time to participate in the way they might like. And we do need also to be careful that the same group of people doesn't continue to be managing this farm forever and ever, because for a start we'll get tired, but also we need to be bringing in different people. And for that reason, we need to be laying down our kind of foundational ethos and our constitution, so that when successive people come in to manage this resource for our area, those kind of that values and ethos will be present. How am I for time? I'm okay, another few minutes. Yeah, and I suppose I just want to say then something very brief about, back to my own story in some ways, but where I have decided to put some of my time. As what I have decided that digging where we stand right now in Ireland, given the money system that we have, I think it's useful to to campaign for a basic income. So I know that sounds like a huge change of emphasis, but I feel that it isn't, because when I think about our farmer on a very modest wage, and some weeks we might not be able to afford to pay him, so he's out of the social welfare system. If he had a floor of basic financial security underneath him, a universal basic income coming into his bank account every week, he would have that stability. The same would go for all activists working in the Commons, any activists, or for people who wanted to just do work of their own that was really meaningful and useful to them. And so I think a basic income is a deprivatisation of a part of the money system. And we do live in a money system, so it might be just a transition to a system without money. But it is something that we could actually do right now. And the group that I'm involved with, Basic Income Ireland, we have worked out how with our present tax and revenue system, we could actually introduce a substantial, a reasonable basic income in Ireland at the moment. Again, the basic income is subject to the same kind of capitalist and anti-capitalist tendencies that the Commons is subject to. It could be used to just make a really flexible workforce that would be available when capitalism needs it, or it could be used to really free up people's talents and abilities. And I do see a role for the state there, but I see it as a role we have to reclaim the state to be an enabler of this kind of thing. And that, I won't go into that, but a lot of that did come up in the conversation later on this morning, and maybe it'll come up in the conversation after this now, but I don't want to take up too much time on it. And of course, there are also many people thinking about new currencies and how we could introduce democratic currencies. And I think any really worthwhile ones of those that would be introduced should have a basic income built into them right from the start as part of their ethos and their values. And there is also the whole notion of thinking about dividends from the Commons, say the money that people would get from their share of of selling those permits could be a type of a citizen's income. So that is maybe something Caroline might have something to say about. But I think the notion of dividends and having a basic income as part of your, simply by virtue of being born, simply as a right of residency or as a right of citizenship of the world, is something that we need to think about, and that I would love to see the left thinking about, and that it's relevant to that discussion about the welfare state that came up earlier, in that the left in Ireland can very often see only private or public, and not something about the notion of dividends. So I'm going to actually at this point maybe invite Caroline to say her few words about the Global Carbon Trust, and then I'll finish off after Caroline finishes.
I won't be long.
That's Caroline there.
just a little bit. Basically, it's just a group of 5 or 6 people, and we're all volunteers, and we're all strapped for time like everyone, and we're kind of scattered a bit, in different countries. I'm Irish, but I'm actually based in France, and there are people, somebody in the Netherlands, a couple of people in the Netherlands, and somebody in Washington DC, and people in different places. And you probably got a little idea from that video about what this is about, but basically it's a really, really ambitious idea, and it's to the point of possibly of absurdity, but the idea is that if we have to have a limit on commons, as the man from Waterford was saying this morning, and I think it's one of Eleanor Alstrom's points as well, is that in order for commons to be viable, you have to have a limit on it, and we now have this big crisis with global warming and climate change and so on. The only real rational way you can think about the atmosphere and sort of try to make sense of what's going on is if you think of it as a kind of commons, as something that belongs to all of us, or maybe not belongs to all of us, but that we all have to find a way to manage together, and figure out an answer to this huge problem that we have. And at the moment, it seems as though the atmosphere in the media and a lot of academia and a lot of the big governmental organisations and all the rest and corporations, it's just treated it unconsciously even as a commodity or as a dump or, you know, one or the other or both. You know, it's just something that's out there and you don't really have to think about much, and, you know, and this is a big source of the problems that we're having now, and, you know, with emissions and all the rest, you know. So, yeah, basically, I mean, the core of what we're thinking is that it's really important to try and think of the atmosphere as a commons. And if you start thinking of it as a commons, then lots of things that are sort of taken for granted, you can see how absurd they are, you know, like the idea that, you know, you can just pollute like crazy and not worry about it, you know. And on the other hand, things that might seem strange in a system with commodification start to make more sense, you know. The idea that, you know, we could all have a share in revenue from the companies, the fossil fuel companies buying permits, all these details that were in the video. These are all details. But I guess there's two big things that could happen. If we think of the atmosphere as a commons, we might finally be able to actually find a way to cap emissions and actually, you know, maybe bring down emissions, and that's something that's just not been achieved at all remotely so far. So that's one thing. And the other part of it is if we do something about sharing out dividends or shares or whatever you want to call it, that might then have a very big effect on inequality in the world, and that's a hugely enormous topic too. And those two things together are very, very powerful, I think. They're powerful ideas, and it's just, yeah, there's so many different things at stake, you know. We're not trying to argue that you can solve this problem by just throwing money at it, or that, you know, you can solve poverty by throwing money at it, or, you know, money is the answer, or that the state has to govern everything, or anything like that. You know, it's all very complex. But I guess the core idea is just that the atmosphere should be thought of as a commons, and then we can sort of think through from there where that goes or where that would lead us to. Yeah, so sorry, this isn't very articulate, but actually what I would love would be if you have questions or things to ask me about it, because I think I'll do better with answering questions than trying to just talk. So.
Great. So we'll come back to that then. Is that okay? We'll just, yeah. Is that okay, Eilish?
Yeah,
Great. Thanks. So I'm just going to finish off really quickly then. So thanks a million for that, Caroline. And yeah, so I really just want to say, just to hand it back to you, you know, as I've given you those sort of patchwork bits, and I'm really hoping that we will do this Quimkna, and that you'll do the rest of the patchwork quilt today, and Eilish is going to facilitate that process.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
So thank you
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
So thanks to Anne for her insights there in terms of kind of thinking about enough and its implications for commons and the quality of relations, and linking it to your experience in the community farm. So what we thought we might do now, if it's okay with you, is just to ask you to meet with a few people and to share any insights or questions or challenges which have come up for you from this morning's session with Sylvia and George, Mary and Órla, and from this afternoon's session. It's kind of just one of those general kind of things. What are you thinking about, really? And what would you like to bring to what would you like to bring to the discussion, reflecting on your own experience and reflecting on, I suppose, a wealth of different ideas and kind of and examples that we've been exposed to, I suppose, so far. So it's a little bit of, if you would organise yourselves a little bit into just little groups around you, not big ones, so, you know, 3 to 5. And maybe we'll do this for about 40 minutes. We'll see how, or not 40, I meant 20, but we'll see how long it goes. Whatever is working, and just find yourselves, whoever you would like to talk to. Probably. You know, when you're doing this group stuff, sorry, this is familiar to most people, but just try and move your chairs into a way that you can actually look at people and see them and talk to them. So we have about 20 minutes or so, and I was just thinking about this. You know, it's a space for, I suppose, adding to the patchwork that Anne was talking about, but at the same time not necessarily repeating discussions that you've already had in your small group. But one of the things one way I thought we might start this and see how this works for you is if you could tell us about anything interesting you heard about in your group. If there was anything interesting that you heard that kind of shifted things a little bit for you, or clarified things, or kind of added even more questions or more challenges, but something you heard rather than, for now anyway, we'll see how this goes, rather than what you said. How does that sound? Yeah? So obviously the success of this is over to all of us. So, and we're all here together, and I've set the ball into the air with that question. So over to you.
I heard from the girls from Spain here about social spaces. Now, I've heard of social spaces before, but reflecting on what Anne was saying in her story about that coffee shop, which became then a place where people could gather and meet and talk about a CSA. And then the CSA then becoming a space where we can talk about other things. So what I suppose I'm highlighting is the need for places to come together. That we've actually lost the sense of connectedness, as I think you were saying, to each other, or to ourselves, to each other, and to our place, and that we need sort of spaces to help us reconnect.
Great, thanks a million. Sorry, I'm reminded, maybe if you wouldn't mind just saying your name when you speak, that would be really helpful.
Davy.
Yeah, Davy. Yeah, thanks a million, Davy. Sorry. Great. Yeah. Anybody else? And then feel free, obviously, to comment on anything that is being said too.
I would like to pick that up, Davy, coming from a fellow Scotsman. One of the things that's kind of I've picked up over the while, and I work quite a lot with asylum seekers, and they were asking about why do people drink so much, and what's this idea with the pub? And so I was explaining where the pub kind of came from, and that idea of the public house, and you couldn't have each individual to heat their own house would cost a lot of money, so you'd all come together, and that kind of thing is dying off, for a number of reasons, from drink driving to price alcohol, drinking in the house, things like that. So even that kind of public house space that would have been there even 30, 50 years ago.
And sorry, what's your
Sorry,
name?
I'm Michael Blaney,
Michael.
UCC.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Michael.
More pubs.
More pubs. From a Scotsman, would you believe it?
And more women to speak.
Sorry.
On women, just a question, aside from all of this. I was in the canteen and I see that the students' union is totally dominated by men. But that's just an aside.
Okay. Anything else interesting that you heard in your group that you'd like to share with the rest of us?
I heard about the Italian woman.
Sorry, can you tell us your name
Oh,
again?
Siobhan is my name.
Great, thanks.
And
Siobhan.
just some interesting things happening in Cork. The community art links. She was telling us that they work with groups all over the city, and they just do art projects with them. And there's also the community print shop, which is happening down at the docks.
No, Lower Oliver Plunkett Street.
Lower Oliver Plunkett. And it's a collective space that has been donated there, and people come and they share skills and all the usual things that hippies do. There's a pop-up restaurant as well once a week where people come together and eat vegan food and cook together. And social, I suppose the thing is that social space does exist, and sometimes you don't know it's there, but it's there all the time, and it's just to find it. And it's we're all looking for people, because nothing can be accomplished alone, and we're all looking for people to resonate with. And those spaces, that's what they are. The spaces are created, they're a bunch of people resonating together, and which much more is accomplished. And then those places exist now in the city, and I really feel like it's summer as well, and there's the energy of growth, but I feel they're growing anyway here. It's all growing, it's growing.
Great, thanks a million, Siobhan. Anybody else reflect on anything you heard?
Just in our group.
Sorry.
It came up in our group. I certainly didn't mention it, but the fact that there is commenting, we do have commenting in a very normal way. So something like the GAA came up, we've mixed views around the GAA, but and a few other just common kind of things that happen that are spaces, but that are very slowly, and so slowly that maybe you don't notice it, being commodified, and that maybe it's important that we hang on to. So one of the members was saying his sons are taking fiddle lessons, and he has to pay for them now, whereas the teachers had those lessons for free. They went to somebody's house, they learned to play the fiddle. So our music, our culture, our sport, these are all kind of commoning activities. They're all in shared spaces. We have all of this already, but we need to be very, very careful to try and preserve it before it does get bought up by Sky Sports or whatever.
Great. Niamh.
Sorry, Niamh. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, great. Thanks. Go ahead.
We had a lot of discussion. Sorry, my name's Kevin. We had a lot of discussion around the state and the relationship between the commons and the state, and so one of the conclusions that I kind of felt that I got out of it was that we need to recognize these spaces, these collective spaces, these common spaces, and to care for them and to nurture them, but also that it's probably not enough, that we also need to confront power. That there's also a necessity to confront power, but my feeling is that one without the other doesn't work. So that the community space, the common space, the collective space is like your grounding. It's your support. It's your base. But it's only from there that you can go, because you know that people have your back.
And are you thinking of any particular examples when you were saying that? Or were you discussing any particular examples?
No, I guess it's that not any particular examples, but there are so many commons or cooperative type projects happening all over, and they're very inspiring examples in and of their own right. But oftentimes they may lack the solidarity practice, connecting and being able to support each other at a sort of a regional or at the state level, so they become vulnerable. They're in danger of being vulnerable. So there's a necessity. I think it's important to recognise that there's times when we need to confront power. This was compared to our discussion.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks a million.
My name is Claudia. I would just like to add to what Kevin was saying there. But I think the prime example for what he was talking about, I think, is the normal political burnout. That if we're involved in political campaigns, we need to get the energy somewhere to put into the campaigns. So if you don't have these friendship networks or something else to do, we run out of the energy. So for me, what he was talking about really much points in that direction. It's a political burnout is the prime example of where the balance isn't there between having somebody in your back, something to do where you get energies from, you can then put somewhere else.
Great, thanks Claudia.
Yeah, it's just myself and Kevin, we were in the same group. And Mark, sorry.
Sorry, okay, it's getting annoying at this stage. I won't say it anymore, I promise, okay, sorry.
The rest of us say it, the rest of us say it.
Anybody who knows the person. And it was an interesting conversation, but I brought it, we were talking about the idea of kind of confrontation, how if you confront power, that it can sound a bit almost kind of, inverted commas, dangerous, but I don't think it necessarily has to be like that. And I was reading a little bit of Gandhi's kind of philosophy, and even though he's known for peaceful confrontation, non-violent confrontation, yet but the words he uses in a sense are kind of interesting because they're kind of almost militaristic, and he talks about that idea of confronting power but doing it in a non-violent way. And something which really kind of struck me and resonated with me was the idea is the worst thing you can be is be a coward. And what he meant by that, and which is quite it's a declarative statement. He's going for it. He's not some guy in a white kind of in a kind of a passive way. But what he exactly said is what he's talking about, he confronted the British state in India because he saw it as illegitimate. And I suppose what I think it's a guy called Norman Finkelstein, who's an interesting academic, and he deals a lot with Palestine, but that's a bit different thing. But he's written a book kind of recently where he talks about this. He says, okay, at some point we have to confront the problem, but first we must isolate and find out what the problem is. And I think our discussion was about that there. And I think in an abstract sense we can be talking today about neoliberalism is the problem. So at what point do we go there? What point do we go the next step, I guess, is what I'm saying, is if neoliberalism is the problem, an economic force and an economic imperative, at what point do we have to, at what point does the commons become political? That's the question.
Any thoughts on it yourself, just as a matter of interest?
Jesus, we talked and talked and I'm not really sure, but I guess that if the problem is emanating from one source, I guess that's no. This is just a question. Like, at what point do we, for example, is the water movement in Ireland, is that a kind of a catalyst? Is that a movement to confront the neoliberal imperative to privatise our water? Is that? I'd be interested to hear what other people.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Hi, Sarah. So I think the question of power is really interesting, that you talked about in your group. We probably touched on it a little bit ourselves actually as well. But I think it's interesting that we're viewing power first off as a kind of a one person has it or one group has it. In fact, I think it's everywhere. And it's probably in all relationships, on individual level, state level, community level. So I don't know, it's about recognizing where your power, like everyone has power. You're not an agent that is without power. I think we can be empowered. You can feel powerless, but you actually have power. So as a collective, it can be an expression of group power, which is potent in a demonstration. But we talked about that earlier, about the demonstrations, whether, I can't remember. What, Sylvia, you said something about demonstrations?
Not knowing the people.
Demonstration and not enough.
Right, but you need to have power yourself. You need to be empowered as an individual, perhaps. I don't know.
Well, I was speaking about the fact that the question of the commons. It's also a question of building particular relations. Relation among people, of trust and so on. And that's where really, in a sense, call it empowerment comes from.
Right.
Because otherwise, it's very. This was the experience of the anti-globalization movement. At a certain point, people were able to come together, maybe thousands and thousands, in Quebec, etc. After the high of Seattle. But then you realize that, where do we go?
Right.
Then there was always this feeling of the high, when you come together 10,000 people, and then
it's a vacuum.
you're exhausted, and
Yeah.
then nothing happens in between, this up and down, and realizing that the day-to-day building, the building in a lot of different ways. And I was thinking as you were talking, the big demonstration, neoliberalism against the World Bank, those moments are important, but also, neoliberalism needs a lot of struggles. Neoliberalism is like a big cap, a big abstraction, but neoliberalism is implemented through a lot, let's say, through this conversation. In the United States now, you can even give food away for free. There's an organization, Food Not Bombs, and now they're using all kinds of excuses, but to say no, it's illegal to give away food for free. You can even pick up, people throw away so many things. Trash is a common. Everybody picks the trash, particularly in the more affluent areas where you can actually furnish your wardrobe, your summer wardrobe, by going through the. And so now, no, presumably in New York you cannot pick up the trash. Every day, you can have animals in the city. You can have a chicken in the city. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you can fight, but if you have the power, yes, then you storm the World Bank. But And I'm not suggesting the storming the World Bank is the end of neoliberalism.
Let's do it.
But I think you fight it also, you begin to build a power, fighting also in a lot of very specific places where people are beginning to say, no, we don't accept this. You know, so you might not be able to confront that, to change the system, but you can change, you can begin to come together with other people. Right? The problem is how do we really, you know, transform the ground. And I think that's where those struggles, they may seem small, they may seem, you know, not very significant, but they are very, very important many times to begin to bring people together. And the important thing is also in our experience is that those struggles do not stay isolated, that they begin to connect, you know, so that, you know, the struggle, well, like the struggle over water in many places, you know, begins to connect with the struggle over housings. There's important connections there. And I think that that process is the process of connecting the commons, you know, so they don't remain isolated, you know, isolated experiments, but they begin to connect and give power to each other. I think that's the process, I think, that is really important. That creates the base, you know, the material base that you were talking about. Otherwise, we are lost because it feels so overwhelming. You know, the balance of power seems so unequal. You know? But then if you begin to see, I mean, just in this room, just since this morning, just in our group, you know, everybody's doing something. And there's so many projects, so many people are working, there's so many, you know, beehives. And I think that's really, you know, important to keep in mind. Otherwise, you're already defeated.
Great, thanks, Sylvia. Anybody else like to contribute?
Yeah, Órla, it's not something that came up in our oh yeah, I'm Órla. But it didn't really come up in our discussion, but just listening to the discussion I'm reminded of it, and it goes back to when we were discussing your book, Caliban and the Witch. I remember one evening when we were discussing it, there was one point that we we discussed, and it relates to this, the way, particularly, say, for women, how, on the one hand, well, we've been talking about this kind of yearning that we have for connection with each other, but also how our connections have been, there has been so much pushing us against, you know, pushing against connections, the kind of cultivation of competition. And remember last year Gustavo was talking about how, you know, we're constructed as individuals, but we can never be individuals. But I remember just one point, one of the many gems that's in the book was about how even the word gossip.
Yes.
That where you say that, you know, that before the word a word gossip is referred to a woman's friend. It was another woman who was
my
her
gossip.
friend. My gossip, my friend.
My gossip.
But how that became, you know, twisted, that, you know, where a gossip then becomes this completely negative, disparaging, you know, so that, but I think even being aware of that how, say, strong connections between each other, between women, have been disparaged, systematically disparaged. And even knowing that, and even to catch yourself doing, you know, kind of feeding into that, and I think that's what part of what the Commons recognises. That's part of what you were talking about, by doing things with people. They're just some.
To me, it's like putting your life in common. The process of the common is also common in your lives.
But also knowing that that there's so many things that are working against that you know, so that even in terms of forming good friendships with women is subversive.
Yes.
And I think this sort of your question, you know, you were saying, when does the commons become political? When does neoliberalism become an individual struggle? And I think it's when it comes in, knocks on your front door and into your front garden, like, because really we don't have to go looking for any fights, like they're all coming to us. Because if you value just living in a sort of a common sense free way, then there's already 100 laws that you're breaking. You know, like, you know, if you have to tax the car and insure the car, and you have to vaccinate your goat, like, and you have to license the dog, and you can't cut a bit of turf, and you can't plant the wrong seed, like, and just really outrageous kind of
You
things.
can't bring food into this room.
It's a good one. And you know, that's when I think it gets political, just when literally your daily routine is curbed. You know, your norm and stuff.
Yeah, when you refuse to compete.
Yeah.
So it's already political. Living is political.
Great, thanks very much. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just listening to Caroline, she was talking about the cap and share, right? I'm just listening to the conversation there. If I was to say to someone 20 years ago, Donny,
That was an abstract thing.
She's a great hearing there, Donny.
if you were to say to someone 20 years ago that a man could marry a man and a woman could marry a woman and someone with a beard would win the Eurovision Song Contest, you'd be laughed out of the place. You know? And what was it about, to my mind, is the ability to take the vision, like Caroline has, but to be able to take the vision and to give it to someone else. And I think that's where we're falling down, in a sense, in competing against neoliberalism, because they just talk one thing, money in your pocket, you know, this is what it's about. Whereas we're talking about something that's a whole complete change of lifestyle, something that we're not able to put the vision to others. Many people have the vision, but we're not able to put it in as a narrative, that people can grasp it and understand it, as they can understand the narrative of bread and butter on the table and a roof over your head, which comes from the promise of from the neoliberal, you know, from your job, from that type of a system. But we are not able to transfer how we feel into that narrative that's totally accepted as a mainstream and achievable type of thing. I think.
And one of the questions that George, it struck me this morning, one of the questions that George asked was about, does commons help us to describe our reality and the kinds of transformations and struggles? Like, that's what our whole day is about in some ways. To what extent is commoning and the commons a useful way both of thinking about this kind of indescribable reality that we know what it is when we see it, as Mary opened the day with. It's kind of very difficult to put your hand on it, to put your finger on it, but you know what it is. So for you, does the commons work for that, or is it just kind of a bit too esoteric?
No, I think George was saying it in terms of its language.
Yeah.
It's how he explains the narrative, right? If you look at the Greens, I was just saying to our group, and I was saying it, but if you look at the Greens, how they've given Green a bad name in Ireland, right? Amongst the people that I come from, right? Working class people. Because what the Greens did in looking for to change with their carbon taxes is they put tax on, they took more money out of my pocket as an ordinary worker, right? It meant that I'm living out the country where there is no bus service, where I have to drive to get to work. They have to put an extra charge on me and stuff like that. Eminently sensible type of stuff, but there's a cost on it. So in explaining, in the Greens taking that step, they actually pushed their cause, I think, back the way. And it's coming back to how people perceive the thing, if I'm answering it correctly now, I hope. But it's coming back to how I perceive it, or a group of people perceive it, or that this thing is not oppressive to me. This is not something that's designed to take something from me. But this is absolutely vital for the survival of the planet, you know, and it's how to tell that story correctly.
Great, thanks, Tony. And we're coming towards to a wrap up, so I guess if anybody would like to say anything now, maybe the next 5 minutes is probably the time. Sorry, Sylvia, did I just cut you off?
No, I've been very interested in one of the about ways in which we can think of struggles around wages and around monetary relation and struggles on the commons, how they can actually intersect and give power to each other. And that's something that I find, for example, one of the things, since particularly coming back from Buenos Aires, I've been thinking about how do we create territorial, for example, we don't have a territorial continuity in our towns. We have gardens, community garden, we have time banks, but we don't have that kind of common space, And then, for example, I've been reminded that many struggle around housing are beginning to create the kind of, for example, broad struggles against rent increase, right? Are beginning to create the kind of, I couldn't say territorial base, but they're bringing together large number of people of, large spaces. I've been thinking about the movement in Italy in the 70s for self-reduction, which was an amazing movement. They really created a big common around the struggle that had to do with money, where you decide, you people building committees in many, many communities to decide what we pay for rent. This is the rent that we can afford to pay. This is what we can afford to pay for electricity. This is what we can afford to pay for transports, etc. And I think these are kind of struggle and initiatives that begin to bring together some of the concerns that you're speaking to, right? The question of money, the question, and also at the same time, they are really community building. They're really building, in a sense, a network of people who are connected, who are committing to each other. Because you wouldn't be able to have a self-reduction, go any place, any success, unless people really do have that commitment to stay. So I think that they should not be seen as going to different directions. But I think we should think of ways in which actually they can give power to each other. And also because issue around money and wages can be very divisive. So it's very important to keep the common inside of the struggle in mind. Because wages are often so much used to divide people. The wage, this has been the traditional use of the wage, like capitalism has used the wage actually not only to pay for work, but to divide people, to create hierarchies. So it's very important to keep that in mind.
Great, thanks, Sylvia.
Paul is my name, and again I think, I'm sorry, your name,
Donald.
Sorry. I think it's really important. One of the things that strikes me, and I come from a rural community, not dissimilar, and the thing that strikes me is that I think storytelling can be a really powerful way of mobilizing a popular consciousness. And I think, when I would be urban based, I could have book clubs, and it's great to be engaged intellectually, but we understand storytelling in Ireland. We understand the importance of narrative. And I think if we could, I suppose in some way, start telling critical stories of the commons internationally, but connected with our own immediate experience and our cultural memory of commons here in Ireland, I think it might be a powerful way of democratising the dialogue around commons.
Great, thanks. Sorry. I'll come back on that. I'll come back to you, Seamus. Yeah.
During the sit-in when the glass factory closed in Waterford in 2009, one of the things that there was I don't know if any of you are familiar with Real News or EEL. They're based in England, but they came over to have a look at the situation with ourselves, and they brought over some videos of occupations in Argentina. And some of our people who wouldn't know an anarchist from their elbow, and not, like me, but they were sitting down and able to connect to what was happening in Argentina and the occupations with their own situation, and the story was there because they were able to see it, and people took a great interest in it. Yeah, sorry.
Great, thanks a million. Yeah, Seamus.
Seamus. Something that was raised earlier on this morning, I just think it was relevant to what you were saying there, Donnie, and yourself. Whether or not the struggle is based out of necessity or whether it's based out of choice. Like, I think that's something that wasn't really, like, it was sort of discussed in our group a little bit, but we didn't really come to a conclusion on it, I wouldn't think. Like, a lot of the struggles would be based in necessity, like in Ireland and around the country, like around the world as well. But some of them, like Davies, Cloughjordan, and Neve there from Cloughjordan, like some of them things are more out of choice. So I don't know how the connection can be made, and maybe the narrative of that is important to try to connect them, not just the ones out of necessity and the ones out of choice, and how, you know, that could be the narrative as an alternative to a neoliberal, you know, agenda or whatever else.
Okay, thanks very much. I think we'll leave it there. I'm to hand over to you, Mary, I understand, for a little quick wrap up. Thanks very much for your engagement.
Okay, so my last little job for today is to do a little bit of a wind up. I don't think there's a lot to say, to be honest with you. I've written down a few bits and pieces, but I think we've said so much that it certainly can't be summed up, that's for sure. So the first thing I want to do is put on the Mary hat. I'm Mary, and I just want to say, to follow up on what Orla was saying about what Sylvia has elaborated so poignantly in Caliban and the Witch about the decimation of women's relationships. And I am quite sure that we could subject men's relationships to the same kind of analysis. Mm-hmm. You know, our men, they're great, but they only talk about sport. Let's start with there. Mm-hmm. So, and the thing that strikes me is that that particular train that was put in motion in the Middle Ages continues even today. Because in terms of homophobia, of course, lesbians have always been characterised as vampires, as the incubus, that classic medieval image sitting on somebody's chest. And there's loads of ways in which we are set against each other and seen as vampiric in one way or another on each other. And if we can get around that, I think we really would go a long way to stretching out our hands to one another across all the divides. And I think Paul's point about storytelling is absolutely apt. Anecdotes and personal stories won the referendum. We had a drag queen who was 7 foot tall on the Abbey Theatre calling the nation to radical choices. Anyway, Mary hat off, MC hat back on. So, okay, a very brief attempt to summarise what I think I've heard today. And the first thing I want to just say is a question that Sylvia put to us. And that is, do we believe we can control our lives? Do we believe we can do that? I think a lot of us spend a lot of our time not sure about that, or chasing time, money, debt, whatever it is. Just that question alone. Do we believe we can control our lives? Do we believe we can be autonomous? That's the first thing. The second thing is George's wonderful point, love you George, that primitive accumulation is an ongoing battle. That in some level capitalism is actually, in fact, slightly on the back foot all the time. So that field was ploughed away and all the nibblers came back in and planted their things and kept doing it. And maybe that there's something about the world. Now I'm in a utopian hippie mode over here, people, okay, so I'm really trying. But I really believe that in some way the world moves towards healing and moves towards life and moves towards integration. And if we can trust that a bit, I think we might sustain ourselves a bit. The next point that struck me is that it is obviously not just about subsistence, but about resistance, as Martin has brought up again. And of course, that's really important, but how we do that is crucial. If you get locked into your enemy, you become the mirror image of your enemy, and you reduce both yourself and them. And I think we're tired of that particular mode of resistance. And to reference the referendum again, the very power of camp, of parody, of irony, of reversal, has been demonstrated as a very powerful social tool, and we might think about that too. Laughter is a great subverter. And then Anne's point about enough is plenty. And the thing that just struck me as Anne was speaking was our hungers. The hungers we bring to our lives and to our communities. And how we think about those and how we answer them. We're often so hungry. And what are we looking at for? And I might go back to those primal relationships. Maybe they are the thing we really hunger for more than anything else. And that rather than going into a kind of a Christian-based morality to address the matter of hunger, we might start using terminology that might be familiar and is problematic but might be helpful. Things like, we're beginning to understand things like addictions. And we're addicted to all sorts of mad things. And that might be a way that we can talk about and raise that discourse up into a more politically nuanced analysis that might help. For example, I'm just throwing it out as a randomer. Finally, again, George said this and it really moved me, is this idea of the good life. That if we live an amenable life, if we can live in a way that we have our basic needs met in a social context, that we will not walk into slavery. Nobody willingly does that. Nobody walks into a neoliberal cage if they can avoid it. And that's a really hopeful thing for me. That the sociality that we need, the opening of public spaces. And again, the one thing that I ended up saying repeatedly on that bus tour is, with your little mic in your hand, saying what that bus was a public space. It was really, really weird. When we pull into small towns, initially it was just to support local yes equality groups, but it offered a space, like they came out of the walls eventually, after about 10 or 20 minutes when they were trying to suss out whether it was okay to be kind of over with the weirdos and the queers and the gays, and you know, you might get the gay bug and whatever. And then people came over and it was great. It was a public space and it gave straight allies the chance to stand beside their lesbian and gay and brothers and sisters in a way that they've always wanted to. And it removed shame. For me, homophobia affects straight people nearly more than it does lesbian and gay people. All those parents who felt ashamed of having gay children or brothers and sisters, that was all wiped away. And they said no, feck off, basically. Finally then, the last thing, and it kind of reverts to what I think Anne was saying, is about new moralities. I personally have just given up entirely on the morality of the hero. The Christian morality of the hero or the martyr or the victim. I don't think this helps us anymore. So if we're trying to formulate new, moralities, I think we have to find a whole new vocabulary. And we have to have a new metaphysics, a new mysticism. And we have to think about how we feel about the world. Back to the nibblers. I think the field still grows all the time. That's all I can pull from today. It was a great day. Thank you all.